The Chicago Bears filled the biggest need on their roster right as training camp is about to start.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook, join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk, and make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. On the show today, finally, a right guard, a veteran right guard signed for the Chicago Bears, a much needed veteran addition right on the eve of training camp. We'll get to know new Bears offensive lineman Michael Schofield. Look at where he fits on this offensive line and in the bigger picture of this Bears offseason. We'll kind of break down some of his career and his past, how he's gotten to Chicago, and how it's kind of bringing some of his career a little bit full circle in a specific scheme sense. We'll get into that a little bit. And then we'll look at, okay, now the Bears are finally bringing in players again. They have salary cap space. Where else could they or should they look to add veterans with the money that they have at positions where they could either use more depth or more competition for the starting lineup? But it's about damn time the Bears signed a right guard. We got the news on Sunday of them working out Michael Schofield, and then yesterday made the signing official. And my first thought was just like, what took so long? Why wait all the way up until the eve of training camp? Literally, today, Tuesday, as this podcast comes out, is the day that the rest of the team fully reports to Bears training camp. And so that's the day they bring him, I guess the day before or 2 days before, they bring him in for a workout, the day before they officially sign him. And I'm just left kind of wondering, why now as opposed to a month ago or 2 months ago? When, Michael Schofield has been available all this time, and the Bears need at right guard and just in the interior offensive line spot there in general has been the same throughout. So the big issue this offseason, right, was that there was not salary cap space during the main portion of free agency. But like we've detailed on this podcast many times, if you've been following along, June 1st, a certain salary cap rule took place so that the Bears freed up a bunch of cap space from Danny Trevathan and Tariq Cohen's contract. After June 1st, the Bears went up to like $22 or $24 million of salary cap space. Can't remember the exact number at this time. And all of a sudden, this windfall of cash was available, and they haven't really used it to sign players at some of these positions of need. For a little while there, they had Dakota Dozier competing with Sam Mustipher at right guard, and presumably that is where Michael Schofield will more or less be handed the starting job. He's still going to have to compete for it and earn the starting job, but presumably he has proven to be a better player consistently through his career thus far than Sam Mustipher. We'll get through his career a little bit more in a moment, but Dakota Dozier got hurt, tore his ACL, as it turned out, but got hurt June 21st. I went back and looked at the date. Even before the injury, when Mustipher and Dakota Dozier was your plan at right guard, it still felt like more competition was going to be needed and necessary there. And that the Bears at minicamp and OTAs or whatever, sure, maybe they were still wanting to see what they had in those guys and in certainly the rookies that they drafted on the offensive line and the young offensive tackles that they inherited. Sure, I can sort of maybe justify understanding wanting to see them at minicamp and OTAs. But then, those practices ended at the end of June, and certainly Dakota Dozier got hurt June 21st, and it was not long after that they determined it was a very serious injury and an ACL that he has since had surgery on and will miss the rest or all of the 2022 season here. So they've had more than a month of this exact offensive line group in place. And it's not until now, 2 days before training camp, that they sign that right guard. Nothing has changed about how good or bad the Bears offensive linemen are in that time. No one additionally that we know of, and maybe perhaps there'll be a physically unable to perform list injury that could come out, by the time you're hearing this podcast or soon after this podcast comes out, that changes the offensive line composition. But otherwise, from the moment they signed him to the end of OTAs, nothing has changed publicly about this offensive line. So now they go out and get him. And I'm glad that they're now being proactive about it. It's good that they have him. This is not a criticism of no, why bother signing him at all? No, please sign him. I don't know why they waited this long. And you could say, well, no teams were practicing, so what harm was there to just waiting until training camp to finally bring him in? But there's always that risk that another team goes out and signs him. If you identified Michael Schofield as a guy that you would want to add to your football team June 21st when Dakota Dozier gets hurt, why wait until July 25th to make the deal? Glad he's here. I think he's going to provide a very clear upgrade at right guard over what we've seen from Sam Mustipher at this time. And by adding at that position, Sam Mustipher can then be more of a potential depth guy, assuming that he loses the competition, which seems likely given what we know about Michael Schofield. And it can have this ripple effect through the rest of the offensive line where he also has some versatility to play multiple positions. Mustipher could be your backup center and backup guards. Maybe you keep one of the other rookies then, either Zachary Thomas or Doug Kramer, and have those two handle your three backup interior offensive line positions. And all of a sudden, the whole interior gets stronger by adding one player and kind of pushing the depth back down and giving you better options then across the board and a reliable, experienced veteran at a very key position for Justin Fields' success this upcoming season. We'll kind of go into some of his reliability and his experience over his career. Worked in a lot of different schemes, but kind of getting back to his roots a little bit with this Bears offense next on Locked On Bears. So many of us have been in a position in our lives where we're a little tight on cash. You're feeling a little bit paycheck to paycheck, and maybe you can't afford to quite fill up your gas tank all the way, or you're wondering how you're going to get by with some of these expenses, and there's a lot of stress that comes with that. But our friends at Dave are here to help you get out of that pinch when you really need it. Dave is a banking app that can help you get $500 instantly with extra cash. That's more money to fill your tank, buy that wedding gift this summer, or catch up on bills. You can finally tackle those expenses that have been causing you that stress without any hangups, because there's no interest and no credit check needed with Dave. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get the financial relief they need with extra cash. So if you're in a pinch and need some extra help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That's DAVE. Sign up for an extra cash account and get $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve. Member FDIC. I don't want to oversell Michael Schofield as some Pro Bowl guard that's coming in like Josh Sitton 5-6 years ago now. Wow, that's a long time. Coming in like Josh Sitton and providing, top-notch guard play. I mean, the reason that a guy like Michael Schofield is available now and has been available now is because he's not, he's not a top 10 offensive guard in the NFL. But throughout his career, he has been reliable, consistent. You know what you're going to get. Hasn't even had much of a drastic, injury history. Has many seasons as a consistent, valued starter in this league. And so that's why it's so easy to immediately sort of assume that he's going to be a part of this offensive line starting lineup without too much of a competition. I think it's going to be, they'll call it a competition, they'll keep it open, but he's a guy that you can rely on because, he was the starter for the Chargers last season. Started, I think, 12 games for them. Started off the year on the bench, but came off on the bench and was really solid. He's been, throughout his career, very consistent in pass protection. He's been on a number of different teams. I think the Broncos, the Chargers, the Panthers, I think a little bit, maybe in the Ravens as well. And it was a couple stints with the Chargers. And pretty consistently throughout there, he's been a guy that you can rely on in pass protection pretty consistently. He's going to give up a sack or two. He's going to give up some pressures. Not a Pro Bowler, but you can trust him to be able to anchor against stronger interior rushers, to be able to pass off stunts pretty effectively there, and just hold that down so you don't feel like it's this constant hole that the opposing team is going to be able to attack. He's never been, that hard-nosed, mauling run blocker per se. He's not like that type of downhill physical mauler, butt kicker up front. But he can get by there, and he's not gonna allow like the instant penetration in the backfield every time you're trying to hand the ball off up the middle either. And I think it's going to be an interesting transition for him now coming back to Chicago, or coming to Chicago, but back into this style of offense. I think it should be a little bit easier for him, especially as Luke Getsy tries to make the whole scheme easier for Justin Fields and for the offensive line. Because the Chargers offense under Joe Lombardi was one that didn't go out of its way to simplify things and make things easier for Justin Herbert. It's why it was extra impressive what Herbert has been able to do. But they're among the bottom of the league in use of play action, for example, or run pass option, those things that we think of to make a rookie quarterback's job easier. And so those things also tend to make an offensive lineman's job easier. And on play action, when the pass rushers aren't exactly sure if you're running or passing, and so they're not going to pin their ears back quite exactly the same way. Or in the run pass option, when you're literally run blocking and the quarterback might be throwing the ball while you're run blocking. So things like that can make Schofield's job even easier in Chicago. The Chargers offense was also a little bit more gap scheme and inside zone, power and traps with pulling offensive linemen than this Bears stretch outside zone scheme. So he'll be on the move horizontally a little bit more in Chicago than he was in Los Angeles. But he started his career with the Denver Broncos, he made his first starts, I should say, his first real in-game live experience was with the Denver Broncos in Gary Kubiak's outside zone scheme. He was there for the Super Bowl with Peyton Manning, and then the season after that, first as a right tackle that first starting season, and then second, and then they moved him inside to right guard after that as they had sort of different needs on that offensive line arise. He's done both positions at a very similar, consistent level in this similar style of outside zone scheme. Kubiak came under originally the Mike Shanahan scheme, and then Kyle Shanahan kind of birthed with of course then the Rams head coach McVay, and working then with Mike LaFleur and Matt LaFleur, both LaFleurs, with the Green Bay head coach, and then Luke Getsy, right? You can see how the tree kind of trickles down from Kubiak. It's the same system that he played in earlier in his career. Now he's 30 or whatever, 31 or 30 at this stage, 31, going to be turning 32 in November. So he's not as young and spry as he was earlier in his career, but he has the familiarity with this offense, and I think shouldn't have too much trouble getting back into it. So I think he's gonna be a consistent enough football player that you'll make it work with the running game. He'll certainly be a massive upgrade, I think, in terms of pass protection. And then on top of that, you do have that versatility that he can start at both right guard or right tackle. I think earlier in his career, he occasionally filled in at left tackle in a pinch, but mostly a right side of the line guy. But say, you get into the season and you have an injury at right tackle, and maybe you end up moving Schofield out to right tackle and then Sam Mustipher in at right guard. You just have options however things might play out. And that extra versatility from him also makes him quite valuable. And again, makes me wonder why they didn't prioritize bringing in this type of free agent acquisition a little bit earlier, because the cap space has been there. The need has been there. But then now that things are getting to training camp and they can bring these guys in for a workout and get them in the pads and get them in the mix, I wonder if we might not see a couple of other additions at some point here, or if they're just still sitting on this cap space. But now that you get to see these guys in pads more formally, if the needs will become more visible. Certainly injuries are always a risk at this time too. So we'll take a look at some of the Bears' other options at free agency, that some of these guys, these guys that have been around this whole offseason, but now that you're in training camp, maybe they're ready to spend and they've got the salary cap space to do so. And still in spots where it's not as glaring of a need as right guard, but you can always use more good football players, and you can always use more depth at every position, but especially a few in particular that we'll key in on next on Locked On Bears. When June 1st first came around, I thought we might see a late wave of a few free agent spending for the Chicago Bears that, once that June 1st cap space kicked in, I thought, okay, now you can sign that right guard. Now you can sign another wide receiver. Now you can sign more depth on defense. And it didn't happen at that time. And I wonder if now that Schofield is in the fold as really this late free agent signing, if they won't look around and say, you know what, where else can we upgrade our roster now that we can actually bring these guys into training camp? All of which would be players that I don't know why you wouldn't have just brought them in earlier and had them with your playbook in your organization for as much of the offseason as possible, given that nothing has really changed up to this point. But the options are still there. The money is still there. And I think, like at wide receiver, for example, Bears fans have been talking about Will Fuller since February, still sitting out there as a free agent. And yes, with all these free agents, you're not going to get Pro Bowl caliber guys coming to Chicago at this stage of the process. I mean, Will Fuller's been, I think 879, almost 900 yard season in 2020 with Houston was his best, and that was only 11 games. He was on pace for a 1,000-yard season multiple times in his career. He just has never played a full 16-game season. Has some drop issues too, but speed, vertical, take the top off type of guy to add in with Mooney, with Pringle, with Velus Jones. I think that could be a lot of fun, but he may be holding out for more of a contender. I mean, we'll see what exactly the process might be there too. Otherwise, slot receiver Adam Humphries, kind of your stereotypical under 6 foot tall white slot wide receiver. You see a lot of those in the NFL nowadays. Never going to be a 1,000-yard guy, but can make some guys miss, be another weapon for Fields, and give you just more depth, more competition at wide receiver. Because we don't really know, nothing's really proven besides Darnell Mooney at this point. Pringle, we know Pringle's going to give you something. We just don't know how much. But other than that, it's rookie in Velus Jones, unproven Equanimeous St. Brown, unproven N'Keal Harry, a bunch of other kind of retread guys that they brought in to give them a second chance. If the Bears want to continue that trend with some of these with another free agent wide receiver, you've got Allen Hurns, formerly the Jacksonville Jaguars, was once a proven wide receiver, a 1,000-yard guy, but has not played in a game since 2019. Opted out for a COVID year and then was injured last season, I believe. So we haven't seen it in a while. But Chicago on a 1-year deal to reprove himself and then hit free agency next year would make a lot of sense and would be the only guy not named Darnell Mooney who's ever been a 1,000-yard receiver on the Chicago Bears right now. Like he would bring something proven in the past on a low-risk, high-reward deal. The other former first-round pick out there that could be a reclamation project is John Ross, formerly of the Buffalo Bills and, of course, then the Cincinnati Bengals. But he's kind of fallen off, and there have been some off-the-field questions about how he's doing. He's never really been able to put it together. I think he was on the Giants as well in there. Maybe I'm mixing up the Giants and the Bills with him. But regardless, never really put it together in the N'Keal Harry style of player. There's options out there at wide receiver, and certainly always room to add more players at that position. You like the guys that you have, but that shouldn't stop you from saying, bring in Allen Hurns, bring in Adam Humphries, bring in Will Fuller, and give me the best 5 wide receivers possible, because outside of Darnell Mooney, and we don't really owe too many of these guys very much at receiver. I'd also like to see, why not bring in more on the offensive line, offensive tackle? You've got a competition. You've got maybe Tevin Jenkins questions with Braxton Jones, the rookie, getting an opportunity. And yes, you want to play those young players as much as possible. But more important than playing young players is getting the best offensive line you can for Justin Fields. So you've got Darrell Williams from the Buffalo Bills, who has similar guard and tackle versatility on that right side. Been talking about him all offseason as a guy that could kill 2 birds with 1 stone, potentially, if you move a guy into guard. You've got Schofield now, so the versatility is less needed. But still, bring me in a veteran offensive tackle. Let all the young guys compete maybe for just 1 spot on the other side, and let the other young guys be quality backups that you feel good about if they end up, getting in the mix this season. There's also Matt Eberflus connection, former Indianapolis Colt Eric Fisher was a starting left tackle for them this past season. Bring him in, make it a competition. You're not handing him the starting job. You're saying compete with Tevin Jenkins, compete with Braxton Jones, compete with Larry Borum. You're probably going to win because you've been an NFL starter for a long time, but nothing's guaranteed. Compete, give us the best offensive tackles we possibly can. Or if Fisher's waiting for more of a contending type spot or a true opportunity or whatever, another former Colt, Sam Tevey, they signed him last season. He got hurt in the preseason training camp, missed the whole year with an ACL injury, but he had been the Chargers starting left tackle for a few different seasons. I mean, he comes in, he's still 27 years old, a younger guy, but it started, I think, 3 years in a row for Chargers at left and right tackle for them. Would be a great opportunity for a guy to, coming off an injury, missed a whole season, play a year in Chicago, look good as a starter, cash in next offseason in Chicago or somewhere else. There's good offensive tackle options out there, okay wide receiver options out there to kind of keep building around Justin Fields even more with this salary cap space that you're sitting on. Wouldn't mind to see more defensive depth as well, especially if Robert Quinn, I mean, is he going to arrive at training camp? I guess they're arriving today as this podcast is coming out, so we'll see for sure. But questions about whether he's going to be around for this season or how much of this season. Why not bring in another edge rusher? You got Al-Qadim Muhammad, you got Trevis Gibson, you've got Dominic Robinson, the rookie, but there's no such thing as too many pass rushers. And sitting out there, you've got, Trey Flowers, who didn't live up to the big contract in Detroit, but was solid in New England, and you're not asking him to be Khalil Mack anymore. You just have him rotate in with those guys. Might be holding out for more money or a bigger opportunity, but if he's available, why not kick the tires? Or Carl Nassib from the Raiders, great part of that defensive end rotation. Bring him in. Doesn't need to be the premier guy, but rotate with those guys and give you another consistent veteran pass rusher there. Or if you want to go the younger route and the reclamation route, Takaris McKinley, formerly of the Cardinals, or excuse me, the Falcons and the Browns, was a first-round pick for them, had some injury issues, and is still rehabbing from his injury, and that's why he hasn't signed up to this point, but sounds like he's getting close and maybe ready to go pretty soon. So, and Cleveland may honestly just bring him back once he's ready to go, but if you want to go younger as part of this sort of find if he could be a longer-term piece there, I mean, Carl Nassib's pretty young too, but Takaris McKinley, even younger as that first-round pick reclamation-type project there. The other position that's still looking for a starter at training camp that we talked about in the training camp preview podcast is at linebacker. Roquan Smith, Nick Morrow, yes. Linebacker 3, to be determined. At this point, it looks like Joe Thomas, but, the not really proven consistent guys there. It's a smaller linebacker role, which is a tougher sell to a free agent, but it's better than no contract to a free agent. You got Joe Schobert out there from the Cleveland Browns. AJ Klein from the Buffalo Bills has always been that. I think he was with the Chiefs at one point too, but has always been a solid sort of interior guy there. Or Anthony Hitchens, Kansas City Chiefs. Released him earlier this offseason. Veteran linebacker who, is on the wrong side of 30, I believe, but the Ryan Poles connection is very strong there. And I could see him coming in as a veteran here who can just sort of, lock down that third spot, be in their rundowns mainly, not ask him to do a ton in pass protection, but have a solid role and provide some veteran experience for a lot of younger guys and special teamers on that linebacker depth chart there, and just kind of build out that depth a bit more. That's what it's about for me. It's not like they desperately need another linebacker or desperately need another edge rusher, but if you have the cap space, there's players available, why not add more depth at those positions? Maybe some of these veterans are waiting for training camp to get a little bit deeper so they don't have to practice as much. A lot of them just don't want to do training camp if they can avoid it. But you want them in the building as early as possible to get up to speed as quickly as possible, especially on the offensive line, which is why Schofield needed to happen now. We'll see what the details come out on that contract and what happens next for him. But you can be sure all your Bears training camp updates, we'll have them for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. Hopefully every day, wherever you get your podcasts, or on the YouTube channel, you can get the video form of the podcast as well. I hope you're buckled up and ready to go for what should be an interesting training camp with a lot of competition. We'll be here for you with updates from Hallis Hall to make it that much easier for you to bear down.